probably say that they have reduced the prices of fertilizer. But there are countries, there are parts of this country which don't even need fertilizer. They just simply sometimes rely on farmyard manure because fertilizer will dry their small places. Therefore, what exactly would you recommend? Because Kenyans went to the streets complaining about the high cost of living. Some of them wearing sufurias on their heads. And we are here to try and see whether we can help mitigate the situation. And here, there's political goodwill, I think, from both sides. You say that sometimes there's lack of political goodwill, but the reason we are sitting as NADCO, National Dialogue Committee, illustrates the fact that we, at least the political leadership, is united in trying to come up with a solution. One area is you have not talked about high taxation, for example, but you talk about progressive. I like this, progressive taxation, and not coming up with a straight hammer and say you pay 10% VAT or 18%. Right now the problem is 16% VAT on fuel, which has created a big problem in the country. So in the immediate term, what would you recommend that this committee can consider? Thank you. I've spoken for very long, but I really wanted to appreciate your contribution.
Okay. Yes, Omar? Please, if you can just restrict the first questions just to after, then we'll come to the other people here.
Thank you for your very insightful presentation. SEED has been a very reputable organization for many years that we've had a reference point to. Just one issue that I wanted to get your further thoughts on is the sustainability of subsidies. You talked about some of these intervention measures that are supposed to be austerity or safety net for the most vulnerable in society. So what do you think is the sustainability of subsidies and its economic efficacy in the long term? Number two, you talked quite a bit about external factors. What are these external factors that you are trying to allude to? Thirdly, it might not be directly related to you, but it was mentioned to a certain extent by Masinde, who said that there really might not be a correlation in the hiking of the price of fuel to that of the tax increase or the VAT increase. But one of the things that it is also related to is the volatility of the dollar against the Kenyan currency. Thuge told us that the dollar has been the Kenyan shillings have been overvalued by about 25%. Do you agree with that? And what is causing this volatility of the shilling and other currencies against the dollar? Is it the interest rates having been higher in the US, where I think right now they're almost 5 or 6%. And lastly, the role of agriculture, that has been the emphasis of the Kenya Kwanza government. We are saying that we want to boost production of, in terms of food, because we import about $8 billion worth of food, including cooking oil. So we've invited investors from Indonesia to come and do local manufacturing of edible oils, and we have tried to do this fuel subsidies on agriculture, and God's mercy has sent us rain. But what we wanted to make the frontier in terms of this economic transformation is pegged on agriculture. Do you think it's a right priority, helping the farmers to produce more so that we ease the demand on the dollar, and probably help make sure that we have more economic, the food prices of food are lowered?
Yes, Eugene. Thank you very much. I think first of all to thank Muliro and the other presenters, and to say I think he has really raised what the other presenters had raised, right from Margaret, who started us off, to Kwame, to Masinde, and to himself. And what he talked about was the issue of breaching the social contract, the issue of the tax burden, actually, overburdening the ordinary citizen. I think Margaret said it's only up to a point, then it becomes counterproductive. And that overburdening, I think you put it very eloquently in terms of reaching a level where it actually breaches that social contract. I think from the presentations we've had, I want to thank you very much for joining us and making very specific recommendations. I think Masinde had a very interesting analogy of the mosquito net, where the citizen in a crisis during COVID, there were many safety nets that were put in place to cushion the citizen from the harsh economic adversities that came with COVID-19. Some of the things that we did at the time, because I was in that administration, was the reduction of taxes. You have talked about that tax burden. The other experts have talked about reduction of certain taxes. But at the height of COVID, I think we did reduce certain taxes, including the income tax from 30 to 25%. We had the VAT itself. At the time, I think we were at 16%. We reduced it to 14%. And we had other tax waivers for those low-income earners. And I saw in your presentation, you're saying those at the bottom are the ones bearing the greatest burden when we are overburdening the taxpayer. And we had a cutoff for those who are earning 24,000 monthly salaries and below. We cushioned them against this. I think other COVID interventions that we have put touch on the education sector, and I think you have recommended more investment in education. We have the infrastructure, building classrooms and desks, and many other interventions across different sectors. So what would like you to probably, I don't know if you're following your other presenters in terms of the specific areas of reduction. So the issue is not if, it is how we can reduce this burden that is a real serious challenge to the taxpayer. And we don't reach a situation where we have the situation like arose in the Bible of Balaam and the donkey, where the donkey was overburdened to the point of actually talking to Balaam. I think where we've reached in Kenya today, Kenyans are like that donkey that had to talk, go to the streets and talk and say, this burden is too much. So we are looking at the areas where the burden can be reduced for Kenyans to breathe in terms of short-term and in terms of long-term interventions. So as you conclude, probably we already have what you have presented, but if you have anything more in terms of specific areas of reduction, we'll be very happy to receive your written presentations, in addition to what you have presented, which really agrees with what the others have presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Catherine?
Thank you, Arthur, for your presentation. You have actually touched on many issues, especially when you look at the cost of living in terms of food and the poverty level, food poverty levels for the ordinary Kenyans. This is indeed something that touches most of the Kenyans. And you've also gone ahead to give us and explored ways in which we can pursue to settle this. One of the ways you talked about is the reduction of budgetary deficits. Specifically, maybe you would have gone ahead and looked at this budgetary in your submissions if you're going to do any other supplementary paper. Which specific budgetary deficits are you pointing at? You have been very specific on the tax, and I think I like the idea that you talked about progressive taxation, which will be encouraged for the low cadre people, earning Kenyans maybe to pay less, and also for the well-earning maybe well-paid Kenyans earning more. Those should actually be taxed more. But as you say this, let us get the specifics on this. I like your idea on the prioritizing of education and also supporting the small entrepreneurs in their daily running of their businesses. That would also cut it down. But most importantly, I think I am on the food poverty levels of Kenyans. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, one question. I just want to plead that you send us the full version of your presentation, because what we have here seems to be an abridged version. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe for me, and I also want to join my colleagues in thanking you for this very insightful presentation. And I'll be very specific. When you talk about progressive taxation, and you say you consider progressive taxation which ensures that those who can't afford to pay more do so, my straight question to that is that would that be in relation to what happened in the Finance Bill of 2023, where those earning above $500,000 shillings were the ones being taxed more in terms of the review of the tax bracket? That, in my view, would fall within that category of a progressive taxation system, where people who are earning, as proposed by Parliament in this year's Finance Bill, people who are earning above $500,000 shillings are now required to pay more tax than others. And that also falls within the other provisions, even what is currently being debated by Kenyans in terms of universal healthcare and NHIF, where those who earn more should pay more. But unfortunately, in our circumstances, I think those who pay more also have the elements of the microphone that I'm using and access to the media, and therefore are more critical of tax policies that are progressive. And therefore, those then at the bottom of the pyramid who have no access to the microphone and cameras that we have access to, then have no voice to speak for them. And we find ourselves in a situation where those of us who are earning more have a louder voice than those who have no voice. And probably those are the people you saw wearing sufurias in the streets, as Kwame said, because they had no voice to speak for them. Two, you have spoken about the paradox of tax, the tax dilemma and the paradox of austerity. And I fully agree with you as a student of economics. However, the successful interventions that you quote, Arthur, to me are more of interventions that would work very well in an efficient economy. And I believe Kwame, who is here, who is also a student of economics, would agree with me, just like Arthur, you probably would agree with me, that Kenya is not an efficient economy. And therefore, being an inefficient economy, we may have to borrow from some of the unconventional methods that you have proposed of Ireland. And I want to believe that is what Honorable Hassan Omar was referring to, in relation to the monetary policy that the central bank governor spoke of, I think, only last week, in terms of the interventions that have been there on the Kenya shilling. And now they are saying they have allowed the Kenya shilling to take its equilibrium level without propping it up artificially. Would that also, my question be, warrant or qualify to be such an unconventional method as the case was for Ireland? Two, I agree with you, despite being an inefficient economy, Germany, you told us, South Korea invested increasingly in infrastructure. My direct question, the heavy investment in housing, the heavy investment in infrastructural development in terms of rollout of roads projects across the country, do these qualify again as such increased investment and increased spending in infrastructure that would spur economic activity and help our economy recover? Because I think, as you have said and all other presenters have told us today, we are yet to recover from the effects of the COVID pandemic. The heavy investment, I think in your conclusion, you have rightly advised us to deal with issues to do with transparency and accountability in government, and the control of budget had also touched largely on that, and I think even the Institute of Economic Affairs. You've also rightly advised that we heavily invest in education, and I'm not sure I have the figures, but I think education in the last budget that we passed in Parliament, it was actually the highest consumer of our resources at about 27.2%, followed by energy, ICT, and infrastructure at about 20%. Would we then say that heavy investment in education is what you're advising us that we should look into, besides, of course, other social safety nets like the investments that we have proposed under the universal health care in the 4 bills that Parliament passed and was sent to just about 3 weeks ago. Would this, as my question, be also warrant some of those very sustainable measures that will help our economy to recover? Vis-a-vis what you have said would be other interventions, and I rightly agree with Honorable Eugene Wamalwa that indeed there are interventions, and I was the chair of the budget committee in 2019, and we had tax cuts. But remember, these tax cuts were only for a period of about 6 months. How sustainable is it to have tax cuts that are for a short period, vis-a-vis now the probably longer view measures that you propose in terms of heavy investment in infrastructure, heavy investment in education, heavy investment in ICT that this current administration has taken, vis-a-vis those, I'm trying to avoid the term knee-jerk reaction to the COVID pandemic, which was a short-term stopgap measure for tax cuts that were only for a period. We agree, and I think the presenters before you, Arthur, if you are listening, have indicated that some of the, and I think it was the controller of budget or one of the other presenters whose presentation had the shortfalls that come with such tax cuts, and the huge fiscal deficits you are left in, those fiscal deficits leading to heavier borrowing. Where would you advise us to sit in? Would you propose that we go for this short-term knee-jerk tax cuts that will get us into a larger hole that we were in from the presentations by the earlier presenters? Arthur, thank you. Arthur, you can go on. Maybe attempt to answer those.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Yeah, I think we could spend a lot of time debating this, and I'm not going to pretend that I have, the final answer to all of them. I think these are elements for a broader conversation, which I believe, the other colleagues who have also spoken before me will also be able to contribute to. Just for starters, yes, I think the presentation that I made will be available. I will send the final version to the Secretariat, and then they can distribute it from there. Where should I start? Let us see. Okay, I think a couple of things. I mean, and I think the questions that you all put to me are fairly valid questions, and I think they warrant much deeper engagement and conversation. Just two things to say. I think starting off from the point of view of the tax increases that have been promulgated earlier this year with the finance bill and then subsequently. And you're right in saying that yes, there is a progressive element to that in the way that we are, taxing higher people and delivering. I think where the problem emerges is that people feel, well, they're being taxed more, but they do not necessarily see a commensurate increment in the services that are being delivered. So yes, we are going to pay more for the healthcare system, but a lot of people will tell you that the hospital situation has not necessarily changed. I think very many of us are still also contributing, probably on a daily basis, to help defray hospital expenses for our friends, our relatives. And I think it is this sense of okay, I don't think people have an issue paying more, but they are fine. Let's pay more, but let the service also improve. And I think there is this gap that is not necessarily being seeming too narrow, and that I think is what is creating a sense of some dissonance within the system. There was the element of agriculture and the food system and how we are dealing with it. And I think I was asked a specific question, how can we tackle the high cost of food? Again, I think there are many people who have spoken more eloquently to this. The view that some of us have is that I think, first of all, Kenya is an agricultural, agriculture is the largest employer of Kenyans in one form or another. Secondly, a lot of the food that is produced in our countries is from the small scale producers. Should we not try and understand how is it that we can improve the quality of production of these small-scale farmers? There used to be mechanisms which, for one reason or another, may not be working very well today, such as cooperatives, which I think in the beginning were also not only helping to market, but also helping to improve the quality of output that the people were engaging in. We had agricultural extension, which I think over time has also declined and is no longer the big thing. But I think fundamentally the conversation has to emerge in terms of, rather than looking into importing food or understanding how we can do these things, to take a step back and say, how can we begin to build on what we are actually producing ourselves and make sure that it gets distributed well within the markets, the national markets. Not more than more than one occasion, I think I have been to Trans Nzoia, Western Kenya, and you find that their maize is in the fields, is sort of not being uptaken, and people are telling you, well, it's not being bought. But then here on the eastern side, we have dilemmas of how food security and that sort of thing. So I think the whole question of how we market, or how our internal markets work, needs to be addressed. And I think the moment we can find markets for these people, automatically you're putting money in their pockets, which means that they become consumers of goods and services, which means that in one form or another they are contributing to the tax system, because whether they're paying taxes directly or indirectly through VAT and those sorts of things, the exchequer benefits. But if they're not part of the market system, we all lose. So I think this also needs to be looked at, and I think there are also issues there about the extent to which we want to industrialize. Is that even a thing that we ought to be considering? Is something that we need to perhaps have a much more intense conversation about. I think there are many questions about which are the specific areas of intervention that we might want to tackle, and where do we start? Again, I think these are elements. I don't have a crystal ball to say let's go here rather than there. But I think if we admit, and it seems to be the case, that there is an economic crisis of sorts, one has to start by asking, and I think this is where also the role of this committee is critical, in beginning to saying, what do we want to achieve as a result of these economic interventions we have? What are we going to protect? And what do we hope to achieve? And I think this is again part of the social contract negotiation. Because if we are saying that, yes, we are in financial trouble, but we are not going to sell all our family jewelry, so that means of necessity that we will take a different tack in trying to meet the deficits that we have. And this is my own sense, is that I think the extent of negotiation of how the pain is supposed to be shared is what is missing, and this is what has been causing the tension. So there has been a decision to impose a certain amount of austerity on Kenyans. Maybe or not is not for me to say. But I think the response of the Kenyans, which are saying, no, we reject this attempt to put an austerity on us, it is something that then perhaps needs to make us reflect. As I was preparing for my presentation, I came across a very interesting example of how in South Korea, during the crisis in '97, Korean citizens actually came up and they raised close to $27 billion to give to their government. And how did they do that? They went in their banks, they gave, they withdrew money to give to they sold their jewelry, And that was because I think there was also the social contract that existed. And the citizens said, okay, we are in this together. So, the old lady sold her earrings and whatever, and they put that into the game, and the government was able to repay its foreign debt, $27 billion, and also push back on the austerity sort of things. Are those options that are available to us in Kenya? It is a function of also the extent to which I think we've been able to agree that there is a problem, and that this problem involves all of us. So I think in a roundabout way, coming to answer that question, what should be prioritized first, what should be prioritized next or last? I think these are elements of a negotiation that has to happen at another level. But it all begins from the immediate question: what do we want to protect, and then what do we want to achieve? In all of this, and I think one thing we also have to reflect upon is that even if we make an intervention today in some of these things, we're not necessarily going to see the result of it tomorrow morning, because cause and effect, they are not closely related in time and space. And this can be frustrating, I think, also for policymakers, because you want, and also the politicians, because you want to tell people, this is what I've done, and see, it's already working. The problems that we are trying to deal with are not necessarily problems that can be fixed overnight. And I think that is something that we all have to acknowledge. And therefore, when we're also making interventions, we need to have the longer term view in addressing some of these problems, because quick fixes will only lead us back into a deeper hole. So, yes, we might say, let us do tax cuts. But if we do not analyze or have not got a good understanding of the nature of the economy and the nature of the holes we are trying to plug, we might end up, as the controller budget said, end up creating bigger holes, because then the resources we are raising are then being invested in other things that are not necessarily generating new resources. Two more points, and then I'll end here, my rather roundabout way. I think the question also, yes, we're making large investments in education and health. I think that there's a critical question, and when we look at, I think we need to look at these numbers, not just from the point of view of this is the lump sum we are putting into the education budget, but to also explode it and say, of this 100 that is going into education, how much of this is actually going into salaries and emoluments? How much of this is actually going into renewing what you might consider the plant and equipment component of that sector? So sometimes, and I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but if I recall from some work we did a while ago, we are spending large amounts of money in some of these social sectors, but these are really to also cover personnel costs. And that is not necessarily investing in developing those sectors. So I think there also has to be the question of how do we grow them, and how are we investing in them to make them actually more efficient, to be able to deliver the services that are necessary. And I think this also takes us to another area which the controller of budget, I think, touched on in her presentation at the beginning, which was saying we need to explore public-private partnerships. Perhaps this could be an option. I think what we need to have a conversation about is how can we expand service delivery. But even as we do that, I think some of these conversations need to happen within a context of what are the rules and the values that are going to get. What we've been seeing a lot of is that much as we are privatizing, the approach has been to privatize profit, socialize the losses. And I think that is not necessarily where we ought to be going with these PPPs, because then what happens at the end of the day is that people also begin to see, yeah, they've been privatizing this and that, but the benefits are not necessarily accruing, because the whole notion of public goods is missing. And so as we do all of this public good that we're taking forward, how do we build on these, strengthen the public goods? Because austerity has, I think, as an initial step, that of puncturing the public goods, but also the public's trust is damaged. So I think those are some of the things we want to think about. I have not answered, I think, many of the questions directly because, I think it will require much more time, and perhaps that is also something that the other people who are in this panel that are more competent to respond to than myself. But I thank you for your questions, and I'm open to any further follow-ups that may be there. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much yet again. And I think we should now go back to our panelists here. And I think there are Kwame, and even Masinde. For example, I think we're in agreement that, and I heard this from Kwame, you mentioned that 15.1 million Kenyans are currently suffering from food poverty. You also described the Kenyan predicament as a mix of bad luck, I think it's COVID related, from a COVID pandemic, and also bad economic decisions. What, in your view, are the worst three economic decisions that have been made, and perhaps what would you recommend? And secondly, how has the decline in key agricultural prices, such as tea, coffee, macadamia, impacted on poverty and the cost of living? These are important issues, and I'm sure that Arthur is still on the line. I personally prefer, and I like the example of Sweden, how tax cuts were able to turn and transform that country's economic fortunes, unleashing entrepreneurship and innovation in education and research. And does it surprise any of us that this high taxation has a lot to do with, in your presentations, capital flight, and therefore instability, fluctuations, and in the level of the Kenyan shilling? How do we mitigate all these things? And I think that's why we called you, so that we call a spade a spade. We do not necessarily have to take any defensive positions. Other himself agrees 1 in 3 Kenyans is facing food insecurity. The onset of rains notwithstanding, because unless we improve and as he said, push upwards the smallholder farmer, and nothing happens. And one critical thing the Comptroller of Budget raised, and I thank you for it, is integrity. Kenyans have this feeling that you're going to raise all these taxes and they end up being misappropriated in the first place. How are we going to deal with that issue, which only you, Comptroller, raised? Integrity. And therefore the breach in social contract, as Muliro is saying, where taxes are seen to be unfair and an avenue for stealing. Well, what happens? Instead of realizing an upward economic trajectory, what we instead see is confusion in the marketplace everywhere. Kenyans working in Kiamaiko and other places are worried. They could bring in goods from wherever, share a container, right? 3 of them, now they can't because of taxation. Sorry, but these are the issues, and this one is now addressed to all of you. And maybe Kwame and the Comptroller.
Thank you. Can I? Yeah. Okay. I've got just two questions or so. One is to Madam Dr. Margaret Nyakango. You seem to suggest that there are loopholes around Article 223 that the government officers continue to take advantage of, okay? And therefore abuse the whole principle of Article 223. So, and suggest that we need to make some amendments. I need to understand you better. Are these amendments to Article 223 of the Constitution or to the enabling statute, that is the PFM Act? would you be having its specific amendments in mind? Two is on the issue of levy. This is to Masinde, my good friend Masinde. You seem to suggest that we need to perhaps tie these levies on basic pay, especially the housing levy, as opposed to the gross pay. Would you have in mind an idea what would be the impact of taking that trajectory? Okay, because it seems to be a very, very popular suggestion in my view, and something that can easily impact very, very heavily and positively on the taxpayers. Finally, Masinde again, which specific expenditures would you want to see government reduce as a way of dealing with the skyrocketing cost of living? And how do you leverage the matters of exports and FDI? Okay? Thank you.
Yes, Council. Control of budget. Again, I'm still on this issue of the dollar. I am reliably informed that there's $8.5 billion in the Kenyan market, so there's no scarcity of dollars. But it's an artificial crisis created in terms of scarcity. That there are individuals holding to the dollar on the basis that the shilling is sliding. And the more the scarcity, because we did the G2G, which particularly has injected another $3 billion to the economy because of the deferred payment. So is there a way we can do those mambo matatu thing and get some Kenyans to put back some of those dollars, because as part of the sabotage appears artificial? And why this volatility, again to you, Martin Masinde, you on the dollar, what is your economic explanation, together with Kwame, of the volatility of the dollar? That and it's not only against the Kenyan shilling; it's against all the other currencies in the region. I don't know how the Uganda shilling is appearing to hold on, but the other currencies are sliding quite almost proportionally. Secondly, this whole idea of the housing levy, control of budget, is supposed to support the government housing plan. And even when we designed the housing program a few years ago, it is the housing levy that faced legal opposition then, and therefore the permanent secretary in his State Department were not able to proceed with that program before the elections. We have been able to at least push this through, and the housing levy is intended to provide an offtake to the people who want to inject capital into building of these houses through the PPP that you spoke about. So it's supposed to be an off-taker to these housing programs for those who are able to buy the houses from the various incomes. So to those who are not able, then that's the off-take. The government will take the market risk for those who are not able to sell off all the units that they so built. In your estimation, the program is supposed to employ all cadres of employment. Housing site is a site where you get a highly skilled architect, engineer, and semi-skilled masons interpreting the same plan. So therefore, we are thinking we will provide employment to the various cadres. Do you think that is still a feasible way of putting money back into the economy to allow some bit of economic activity through labor-intensive investment? The last question I had was to use that where's the Kwame presentation? I had it here. But you suggested that we reduce prices of some of the commodities. Do you have the specific commodities that we think we need to reduce prices on? And then lastly, Kwame, by the time we took over, let me remind you, some of the big members here are speaking like Kenya Kwanza has been in government for 100 years, like Ganu. We have been in government for 1 year. President Ruto took office in September last year, and you've all addressed the debt question very effectively. That we were faced with a heavy debt burden, and I saw David D's tweet saying that it is a miracle that we have not defaulted. Where does that default take us to? And the president said we will not take domestic borrowing to pay salaries, so that we continue, because the rate lately we are paying 15% plus for domestic borrowing. So where does that debt question fit into this whole economic ecosystem? Because at one point we want to be an aerated country in terms of debt repayment. We are inviting FDIs. If you see the president's blitz across the globe, it's about foreign direct investment from Saudi Arabia, from Indonesia, from the United States, on various sectors of the economy. So if today the country has poor ratings, and therefore, what does that leave us in terms of our debt patterns? Do we just abandon them and say now we reduce taxes, remove the fuel development levy, which was supposed to backstop the SGR, we remove this, we remove that? Simply the kind of what Ishungwa called the knee-jerk reactions to a crisis. So we've bitten the bullet. We don't know whether we've bitten the right bullet.
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine is to the control of budget. As ways of mitigating on the cost of living, you have made a proposal that we should increase allocations to existing programs like cash transfer schemes. Maybe from where you are sitting, I think the current allocation is 2,000, and I agree with you that that's really minimum. Do you have any figure you can throw to us on what increase you are looking at, from 2,000 to what? Related to that is, there are also a number of Kenyans who are on the lower cadre of earning. You had somebody mention that the minimum salary is at 15,000. And maybe Kenyans earning 15,000, 50,000 are the ones who are hardest hit by the rising cost of living. Can you maybe give us a proposal on what should be the ideal minimum wage for Kenyans that can mitigate the current rise in cost of living? Number two, I think you've really been candid. You have opened up on the cash situation for the country, and you have mentioned, and I believe rightly so, that reduction of our deficit financing is a solution to the current, will be a solution to our current debt crisis. And from the figures you have given, it's clear that as a country, we are really facing a cash crunch. So we must tighten our belts. We must put some measures in place, maybe like what Lyndon Johnson did in the US in 1965, where there was direct cuts on particular ministries. I think the hardest hit in the US government then was the defense ministry. Now, what in your view should be our top 3 priorities on government cuts on expenditure in government? From where you're sitting, if you had to propose 3 priorities in cuts on government expenditure. Finally, from your presentation, what I've gotten is that, and I think that's the law, the PFM Act requires that budgets be contained within the expenditure ceilings of the approved midterm expenditure framework. I think that's the legal position, and I fully agree with you. But it seems the prevailing situation is that the current budgets do not comply. The question I'm asking now, just as a lawyer, are these current budgets then, as passed, illegal? Really going by what you have presented to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll take one also, and I don't know whether it's to anyone.
Sorry, I forgot what you said,
Yes.
with your permission. Now, you mentioned something on hiring spree by counties, yeah? And you mentioned that some are actually spending 47% of their allocations on P&E, personal emoluments. Now, you have left out the situation from national government. You just gave us a position of what is prevailing in counties, but you have not given us the situation on national government. And these are the spiral effect on counties. The Senate last week, we had a situation where some governors have made a petition that because national government is taking in many advisors, because the national government has made proposals for budgetary allocation for spouses of certain kind of office holders within the government, the governors also want to get the same allocation for their spouses. So there is that, there is that spiral effect downwards, They say they have seen in the budget spouses are being allocated 500 million. They also want to be allocated. So can you also give us a true picture, the situation as it is on the national government in terms of the recruitments, advisors for the big office holders and the likes? Thank you.
Catherine had something.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Margaret, for your presentation. I think it's been an eye-opener. And to this team, I think we have listened to the cream of this country in terms of presentations on the economic status of this country. Dr. You are very clear, and you have progressively told us how the economy has depreciated from year in, year out, progressively. I think from the last 3 years, it's been on a deteriorating level. And you attributed it to poor predictions. That was clearly from you. How, in your own wisdom, is these poor predictions going to be curbed, especially now being the director in the control of budget? You also were very clear about the bonds that are now at 18%, and you said it's very, very, it's actually pathetic. Anything that you can do about that, maybe be able to put it in your paper. And also, Dr. Masinde, thank you. You also mentioned something on the exemption of tax, and I think I heard you very clearly. What about the exemption of tax? Is it that the people who are being exempted from tax don't deserve it, or there's corruption in a manner in which they're sorted out? And interestingly, again, you also talked about overlapping of mandates by ministerial, by different functions from different ministries. So can you be able to point out for us which are these overlapping specific functions that we can address in this? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Probably I will start off with the control of budget in relation to what Senator Mugeni was asking on 2 issues. You mentioned the prevalence of manual payrolls in counties where staff are being paid manually and in most cases in cash. I would want to know then what is your role as a controller of budget, and how do you help the country to deal with that issue of manual payrolls, and also the question of pending bills. As you rightly say, those pending bills should constitute the first charge to the exchequer. But your office continues to approve payments for current contracts, probably on the basis of kickbacks that governors and their sidekicks in the counties are getting, at the expense of pending bills. And control of budget, you agree with me, even the current lot of governors, very few of them are settling pending bills. Especially those who have joined the first time, they say they are pending bills that were incurred by their predecessors, and therefore they do not settle them. You have all agreed, or rather what came to me, across to me, from all the presentations, is that this country is yet to recover from the COVID pandemic and the effects of that COVID pandemic to our economy. The Institute of Economic Affairs, you have also rightly put it that inflation at the moment is higher than the wage increments as they are. my question to you, Kwame, would be, then is our problem not an income problem per se, other than, because inflation, as you all again rightly said, there is inflation that is informed by certain things that are beyond our control. But isn't our problem an income problem that so many Kenyans, as you all rightly say, the economy is yet to recover from the effects of the COVID pandemic, so many Kenyans are still out of employment and therefore lack an income. And it would be my view then that our problem is more of an income problem than actually the cost of living per se. And with that in mind, we have had suggestions. And I will draw reference to the presentation by our colleague Arthur Muliro on infrastructure investment, what he said and what I was pretending that probably the housing agenda and that heavy investment in housing is part of what will spur economic activity and generate incomes by creating jobs for many Kenyans to help deal with the problem of the cost of living. If we were to do what some of the things that Kwame referred to as unintended consequences of certain measures, would there be unintended consequences if, for instance, we decided to do away with the housing levy and decided to abandon the housing agenda altogether? Would there be even a huge ramification in terms of unintended consequences of that decision? On tax reforms, the control of budget, you spoke about registration of the informal sector and imposing tax on their businesses with a view to broadening the tax base. And I think, again, listening to all of you across, including the presentation by Arthur, who even spoke to the agricultural sector, and I agree with him. For instance, today farmers have harvested, we are told, close to 61 million bags. And they will make a handsome return on it. What's their contribution to tax? We have used government resources or taxpayers' money to subsidize fertilizer for them. The decrease in terms of the amount that they will be able to sell their maize may not be as significant, but what is their contribution in tax? And probably I think that's what you are alluding to. How do we incorporate all the other Kenyans who are not paying tax to become taxpayers? Because again, it is my view, and that is my personal view, that those of us who have access to the microphone are the loudest. But there are also those who are not loud and are quiet, but are also not paying taxes. How would you propose that we incorporate them in the tax-paying bracket, especially what I think the controller of tax, controller of budget, not of tax, also alluded to in terms of those who are in the informal sector, who are also benefiting from the social contract between government and the people, but they are not contributing in terms of their responsibility to pay taxes. I would want to hear measures you would want. Somebody spoke about reducing the railway development levy and the IDF fees. I think it was you, Kwame. I don't know, Masinde, if I remember right, I think there was some reduction in the Finance Act of 2023 on the RDL and IDF. I think IDF from 1.5 to something. You probably would jog our minds in terms of, because those are some of the areas you are proposing that we could touch on, and I thought we did do that in the Finance Bill of 2023. What was the other thing I had? Yes, last week but one, this committee sought to retreat outside town or within town in a venue that we would have a lot of time. We could not find accommodation in Nairobi. We could not find accommodation in Naivasha. We could not find accommodation in Mombasa. We had to retreat to some nice place somewhere else outside of the known destinations. And we got the feeling from procurement people who are trying to procure a place for us that the accommodation sector was now slowly recovering. And I do recall some time back I also had a quick trip to Mombasa. I could not find accommodation. I had to get an Airbnb. The growth of the Airbnb sector in Nairobi and major urban centers also points in a way to a recovery of that accommodation and restaurant business. And therefore probably we're on the right trajectory, and that is to Kwame. I don't know where then that, does that give us hope as a country that at least as much as we have not recovered, we are on the right trajectory in terms of moving towards recovery in view of what we are seeing? Or is it a one-off event? I don't know whether it's a big season of tourism. Lastly, you all spoke at length to social safety nets. A need to deepen and increase our social safety nets. Our again speak to measures taken by this government, including the measures around universal health coverage, increment of the people who are the elderly and vulnerable groups of the cash transfer program. And I agree with Senator Mogeni, the quantum of 2,000 or 2,500 may not be much, but increasing those numbers, increasing the people who will be under universal health coverage, especially the most vulnerable in our society, that have been defined in the Act as the indigents of our society, having to have universal health coverage free of charge catered for by the government, increment in food to school-going children across the country, increasing that, doubling actually that number from 4 million to almost 8 million children under food sustenance in schools. Will those again constitute measures that may not be adequate, but given the circumstances of our economy, do you think these are social security safeguards that will help us sustain ourselves, at least in the medium to long term, as we hope for a full recovery of the economy? Lastly, Kwame, are there quick fixes, or do we have to bear the pain for now to have what will be sustainable economic recovery? Thank you. Maybe, Controller, if you could start, then we move to Kwame and Masinde in that order. Just in relation to that issue of pending bills, the labor market, again, what is the role of your office in ensuring that the county governments especially, the expenditures that they are incurring in terms of their budgets goes towards helping the economy to recover? And I have in mind what I have seen, for instance, in my own county. Instead of investing in what would be sustainable economic programs, governors are very quick to invest in what would be more populist political programs. I have seen in my county, for instance, the governor heavily investing in dishing out chicken chicks, what they call improved kienyeji chicks, 5 of them to households, giving piglets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 youth, at the expense of what would be sustainable economic interventions that will help our economy to recover. What is the role of your office in ensuring that our county governments are investing in sustainable economic engagements that will help not just the people but also the economy to recover? Because it is your office that then approves some of these expenditures. Why would you be approving expenditure for what are constitute political handouts at the expense of investing in infrastructure, at the expense of investing in social safety nets, like hospital provision of drugs and construction of hospitals, provision of water, things that Kwame will tell you are more beneficial to the country in the long term than what are more of political engagements. The same thing with us, Parliament. And I say this as a parliamentarian. You have spoken and given us figures of how much the political class in this country is spending in terms of travel and domestic hospitality. What is the role of your office then in curtailing the appetite of county assemblies, parliament, and the executive in dealing with some of these rather populist things to the political class, but very expensive to the ordinary Kenyan?
Thank you very much once again, co-chairs. It's quite a mouthful, but I'll run through them as fast as I can. And I'm going to start with how the high taxation has contributed to capital flight. This was raised by one of the chairs. And indeed, we have seen high taxation leading to high prices, and therefore leading to inflation. So sometimes we do not link the high taxation to the high prices and therefore to the capital flight. And I want to give just one example which will show us the direction in which we are moving. Park fees. This morning, in one of the groups that I am in, I saw the ladies saying, why would I pay $200 to enter the park when I can see the same animals from the Tanzanian side by paying very little? So this is just an example. But some of those things we are doing have a ripple effect. So they affect us in more than one way, and I know my colleagues here will be weighing in on that. Now, in terms of integrity, how can we raise integrity? We must do a root cause analysis. We must say, where did it start raining on us? But let me again just give two examples that are making us move into those areas of loss of integrity. One is insecurity. What do I mean by insecurity? If employees, for instance, are not sure whether they'll be employed tomorrow, what do? They, of course, try to gather as much as possible so that they can run away. Two, if employees are insecure in terms of, again, like how long they'll be doing what they're doing, these issues will create uncertainty, and that uncertainty creates loss of integrity. The fear and uncertainty is one of those areas. The other area is borrowing without a plan. This one, I'm using it in a very colloquial sense, in the sense that I have been approving payments of public debt, and I've looked at what we are paying for. Many of those things cannot be identified. You just find a name of why we borrowed. You cannot trace it to anything. You cannot tell what the money was spent for, and therefore there was no economic gain from that borrowing. It is just like taking Fuliza and then you go to the bar and drink it all. You go back home, you'll find your family hungry, and you'll find all those other things. So I don't really need to gainsay this. That is what we have been doing for a long time. I have discussed with the Auditor General, and we have said, can we track these loans and see what we did with them? Yes, I think it will help us going forward. But just so you know, honorable members, I did a report to the Committee on Public Debt, and they told me, please check on the loans which we have taken recently in 2022. Tell us if we can link them with a project. They were shocked. We could not. we found some ambiguous definitions of the loans, and the Treasury could not tell us what really we were going to do with those loans. So unless we wake up and link our borrowing to actual economic activity, will not come out of this hole. That I can say without fear of contradiction. Now, Honorable Opio Wandai asked about Article 223 and what kind of amendments we are looking at. And what I can say here is that Article 223 has no problem on its own. In fact, the way it's crafted is very okay, and it can serve this country just the way it is. But here we are talking of abuse. We are talking of preparing budgets which are approved on 30th June, and on 5th of July, I find applications for Article 223. That clearly is an abuse of the system, because we are saying that every once in a while, we will find this item which is not budgeted for, or for which the budget is insufficient, and then we'll need to fall back on Article 223. But you will find people are making applications to employ, people are making applications to repair vehicles, to refurbish buildings. Really, those are some of the items that should not belong to Article 223.
Maybe you would tell us, since you are the controller of budget.
Yes.
And I hear you and I can relate to what you are saying, having been a chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. What then would you recommend to this committee, whether it's legislative intervention or constitutional safeguards, that one would protect the country from that abuse of Article 223? And I say this with all due respect to yourself. I remember earlier this year or late last year, when you had to share with the country the kind of intimidation that you had to go through under the last regime to approve payments that were illegal and were basically constituted an abuse of that Article 223. And it's the same thing you're speaking to, Controller, when you speak about loans that cannot be tied to anything. And this always happens in the run-up to an election. And 2022 was no exception. What specific measures then would you ask this committee to help your office and help the country with, in terms of probably a constitutional safeguard to your office, so that you never have to go, not yourself, no other officer serving in your office will ever have to go through what you went through, and we completely stall abuse of that Article 223. Because as you rightly say, and I agree with you, Article 223 is in its rightful place in the Constitution. It is its abuse.
Thank you very much once again, Chair. And
I'm sure you can tolerate that interruption very money.
Yeah.
No problem. No problem. So, I don't think I can give a blanket recommendation. What I've been doing, actually, and I do that all the time, is to go on a case-by-case basis. But we must have the political will to say, let us budget in an authentic manner and follow those budgets. Because by the time we are falling back on Article 223, we must be sure that this is something that could not be done within the budgeting framework. So, I am seeking that Parliament, when they are interrogating the budgets, to ensure that those accounting officers are disclosing everything that they need to do. Now, this one does not need any addition to the law. It is what I could say, it's an issue of integrity. So, what I'm doing right now with the National Treasury, who are the generators of this, is to, I respectively tell them that this cannot go through under Article 223. And what we have been doing is, if this is a legitimate request, then it goes through the normal supplementary. So we are doing it on a case-by-case basis. If we went blanket, it is very possible that something will come up that requires to be done under Article 223, and then we would not address it appropriately.
Maybe, and you forgive me,
yes.
Because I am very keen on this. I say that informed by where I have come from. You also took us through a presentation, if members will remember, that was showing the variances between the BPS estimates, the estimates are tabled by the National Treasury and maybe that's why it begins to beat us as a country.
Yes. Yes.
Because if you ask me, and Kwame will bear me witness, and Masinde, we're in the month of October, November now. The budget policy statement and budget making process has already begun. But
For next year.
For the next financial year. But what we do is a copy and paste budgeting process. So by the time people come to actual budget making now in April to June, that's when they realize there's something we never budgeted for. I'll give you a case example this financial year. We put in a lot of money to subsidize farmers in fertilizer inputs and other inputs. We had blessings of the rains, and Honorable Eugene Omalo will bear me witness that farmers in Trans Nzoia and the North and South Rift have done very well in terms of producing maize. But the Ministry of Agriculture never planned for maize dryers. Until when the Met Department announces there's going to be El Nino, and we are caught flat-footed, and we start running around helter-skelter now looking for maize dryers. You buy those maize dryers at a more probably pricier price since it's a last-minute procurement. So what is it, maybe Margaret and His Excellency, you have to bear with me on this one. What is it that we can do to make that process more efficient? And maybe you don't have to answer now, maybe think through it together with Kwame and the others, because we are looking at things that will be sustainable, things that will help us in the country, so that we don't end up with huge fiscal deficits, huge borrowing, huge debt financing, and end up spending all our money paying debt that we should have avoided. Maybe it may not be a question you could answer now, but you can think through it, send us your thoughts probably together with the others. How can we make the budget making process for our country more efficient and more effective?
Co-Chair, I just wanted to propose that perhaps we allow them to answer, then we do another round,
okay.
So that we don't disrupt their...
Well guided. Forgive me, I just happen to be too passionate about these budget issues.
Thank you, thank you. I would then like, in that case, and I agree with the chair that it is something we can look at actually in another forum, so that we address these issues effectively. Let me move to the dollar issue raised by Honorable Omar, in which he has said that there are actually a lot of dollars which are being hidden away in the economy, because then our currency is depreciating all the time. Now, I'm just wondering, a lot of these dollars that we get come from the diaspora. Now, I'm effectively informed, and I think rightly so, that right now there are a lot of panya routes through which dollars come in. I mean that panya routes in the sense that people have devised methods where dollars can be repatriated, say, to South Africa, and then the money finds its way to Kenya in some way, so that it evades the banking system. So if it doesn't go through the banking system, then you may not catch up with it. So there are a lot of dollars coming in through the black markets, and because of the way the currency is depreciating, nobody wants to bring them to the open market because they want the rates to go up. Let me make a suggestion of what I think we can do. I think there should be some form of amnesty, just the same way we have done with the income tax. Can we have some amnesty for people to bring in dollars so that they can be received without any penalties? That is one thing I hope the committee can look at. Now, then there was a question on housing levy in terms of the housing plans and how this was initially stopped and what was intended for offtake then never took off. Allow me to speak like an ordinary citizen in this one. The citizens have lost trust. Now, what happens if every time you speak to someone, they do not keep their word? I think you will not be in a position to trust them the next time they speak. Why I'm saying this is that I keep my ears open a lot of times when people are arguing, my friends on the golf course and all that, and I hear them say, who tells you we'll get these houses? So that lack of trust is making people not to trust the process. It is a very noble idea, and it is supposed to help the citizens. It is supposed to create jobs. It is even supposed to create, all those nice things. But how can we work on improving the trust of the citizens? This is a bit abstract. I don't know how we can even measure the trust, but I'm talking from personal experience because I've been hearing what people are saying on the WhatsApps, on Facebook. Just listen to what the people are saying. They are either completely lost trust or they are losing trust. So that is something we need to look at. Now, which items would we be looking at reducing? Commodities. Supposing we were given by the magic wand and told, pick 3 items that you would like reduced. Here, I will be looking at the food basket of those who are in say the bottom of the pyramid. What are the things that they use? Something to cook with. So that is one area we'll be looking at. I've been looking at the prices of kerosene, the price of makaa, the price of cooking fuel generally is a really sore area because no one can do without it. Then we are looking at sending money. You all know that the cost of sending M-Pesa right now has really gone up. Most of the people who have come to the urban areas who are working in lowly jobs, probably they are security guards, they are maids, call it. They have to send some money home to their parents, to their children, because they can't live with them. Now imagine when we impose and increase excise taxes on sending money, then we are squarely hurting these people. The third thing I would be looking at is VAT on food. And I've looked at all sorts of taxes here. VAT on food. Now, when we introduce VAT on unga, a staple food, then you know the very lowly are going to suffer. So if I had 3 things to choose, those are the things I would choose. Let me move to Senator Umugeni. I'm sure there will be round 2 like we were told. So here we are looking at proposals on allocations to cash transfers. This is pleased to increase the amount. And these people are not many. I think when the last time was over 70s were counted, they were not very many. And they are they have less time with us, isn't it? So even if we double this amount to 4,000, I think would really help them, because they are also subject to inflation and they can only buy so little sugar, you know, so little salt. The 2,000 cannot buy anything. And then it is delayed for many, many months. So if there is anything we would do, it is to increase that amount and give it in a more timely manner. There are these low cadre employees earning the 15,000 who are really hardly hit. And the senator asked if there is an ideal wage that I would suggest. I think I would rather give this to the economists. I don't think this will be good for an accountant. As an accountant, I look at reducing costs. But the economists, I think, will chip in on the ideal minimum wage. Reduction of deficit financing, indeed, we know that we are in a cash crunch. But this cash crunch ni ile ya kujitakia, because like I told you before, we have been borrowing and partying with borrowed money. That is why we are where we are. So we must look very carefully at our spending and reduce this spending. Some of the areas that could be in for budget cuts, and I think the government is already taking measures, thanks to my reports. I think in part I've been reporting where we are spending most. Travel both domestic and international. Then secondly, refurbishments. Yeah, there are many times people are throwing away curtains and bringing in new ones, and a lot of issues like that are very wasteful. Then thirdly, I would be looking at something like the fuel. And here fuel, I'm looking at the kind of vehicles that we buy vis-a-vis the kind of journeys that we make. So look at it in terms of why go to Mombasa if you can go to Naivasha. And I think a concerted effort across the economy can bring a lot of savings in that. Under the PFM expenditure ceilings, we were looking at the current budgets that do not comply with the PFM ceilings. Are they then illegal? Now, I would like to disqualify myself from the illegality in this particular instance, because when we look at national government, we have the sectors, and sectors have leaders, and these things go through public participation. All I can ask is, can these sector leaders do their job? Because if they did their job properly, then we wouldn't be discussing here about illegalities. And circulars are there. I think if they are followed, we should be having the kind of budgets that we expect. Hiring sprees in the counties, which are up to 47. How about the national government in terms of employment? Yes, I've been doing both national and county reports on personnel emolument. So far, the income ratio to the employment has been okay in national government. But watch this space. I'll be reporting on the first quarter. If I find that it has exceeded, you will see it in my reports. Now, going to the counties, let's all appreciate that the counties have a lower income base. So the denominator that they are using to calculate the ratio is much lower. So what are we saying here? The implication is that if the monies to the counties were higher, then probably we would be talking of a lower percentage. If the on-source revenue raised at the counties was higher, it means that the denominator will be higher, and therefore the percentage will be lower. So the message I've been giving to the counties is please try to increase your inflows, because if you increase your inflows, then it means you can accommodate more employment. So that same level of employment would be a much lower percentage if the revenues were higher. So that's what I can say. Now, from Madam Catherine, thank you for the compliment. We have suffered a long time from poor forecasting, and this is an area, please, I would ask the committee to talk to the National Treasury on a very serious note. The exaggerations are in the National Treasury, and let me just give one example. When I was doing the budget for Consolidated Fund Services, this is where my salary is paid from. I found out that my salary was budgeted at 3 times what I'm paid. Wow. I am the only state officer in my institution. So there's nothing like confusion there. I'm all alone. So I asked them, why is the budget showing 3 times what my annual salary is? And it was like that for all the state officers.
What was the answer, madam?
Chairman, I have not received the answer to date.
Integrity. Integrity. They have not answered me why they budgeted 3 times what I'm supposed to be earning. So, now, if that is only my salary, what I'm saying, we don't know what else is dodgy in there. And then when it comes to the supplementary, these amounts are then reallocated to other areas. So, honorable members, I'm asking you to talk to the Treasury in a very matter-of-fact manner to look at the way they are handling the budgeting. I think the problem is there. There is a big problem. Yes. Then let me move to the manual payrolls and what is the role of the COB in terms of manual payrolls. Now, my role, as per the mandate given by the Constitution, I think I don't have to repeat it. My role is advisory as far as this is concerned. So because I look after budget implementation and because I report on a regular basis, I am in contact with this information. So first of all is that when the counties prepare their budgets, they bring the drafts to my office. We analyze and we advise them. Every so often they will tell us we have had and we have made the adjustments. Now, when it comes to implementation, there is a lot of mischief. They'll always go and do other things. And then they'll always prepare a supplementary budget to try and sanitize what has been done. So my office has insisted on always trying to bring them to the straight and narrow in spite of this. But you can imagine that because we have so many counties to begin with, and all of them are doing something, my office is extremely busy trying to check these things and ensuring that they are not going beyond the ceilings. Now we have a system now of registering all workers at the county. The UHR, there is a United HR system which is taking over from the IPPD and which has more features to capture employees and to avoid ghost workers, so to say. So this system is in progress and within which they have complied with this system. This system is being run by the State Department of Public Service. So they keep complaining that that State Department takes very long to implement their requests. But so what we do is that we are consistently and continuously ensuring that they are putting more and more staff onto that system, of course with
a deadline of this year. They are supposed to have complied fully by the end of this financial year. On pending bills, honorable members, like I told you, the pending bills are very high and the causes are many. Now, yet the COB pays current bills instead of the old bills. I would like to respond to this, that I don't pay. Instead, what I do, I approve withdrawals for the payment of pending bills. Now, there is a hidden gem there, in that if I approve the withdrawal, I have no control on who is paid. The money will go to the county, and then the accounting officer will pick different payees and pay them. If you remember, sometime last financial year, I had requested the central bank to give me access to the bank statements of the counties so that I would be tracking these payments. That became a cropper because the Council of Governors threatened to go to court. They could not allow any such thing because there's a lot happening in those statements that apparently I'm not supposed to see. So the long and short of it, Honorable, I have ensured that the counties bring me a list of approved, eligible, we call them eligible pending bills. Along with that, they give me a payment plan and they tell me this is what we think we can accommodate within our cash flows. Now, what I do from my office is to implement that payment plan. When they are bringing the requisitions, I make sure that whatever they say they'll be paying per month is included in their requisitions. Or else, I hold their requisitions until they comply. So I make it a kind of policing affair, which shouldn't be the case, but because they are very difficult in complying, then those problems are there. Now, the other problem that I must mention at this point is the counties are always saying that they don't receive their money in good time. So even when they give a payment plan, if they do not receive their monies at the expected time, then they fail to service those pending bills. So that is still another small elephant in the room. Then there is a third elephant, and this third elephant is called ineligible pending bills. These are people who have worked and they are owed money, but for one reason or another, their documentation is incomplete. Either they did not get a proper LPO, or they worked based on good faith. Now they cannot be paid. These are the people you have had who are in real distress, others are dying, and you know, a lot has happened. You are never going to get paid. At the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council, we have agreed in the last meeting that there should be an intergovernmental committee which will be looking at ineligible pending bills to see which ones can be, you know, ratified through some legal process so that they can be paid, and which ones should be thrown out completely. So that is an ongoing process. Let me move to tax reforms and what we are going to get in form of taxes, saying when we assist the farmers, and this came from the co-chair there. I think this is more of a self-examination where we are saying what services can we provide to the farmers to ensure that they actually sell their produce and get the returns that they expected. I'm sure even if they don't pay directly, these people are going to turn around the economy by spending and therefore paying VAT. So if you have, that is what I would say. You don't have to tax them directly.
Without interrupting, I thought Kimani wanted them taxed. It's okay.
I I think that's what he was saying, Chair, but I'm opposing that and saying, let's improve the economy and let's improve the spending power. These farmers will spend all that money in the shops and in the bars. They buy beer.
In actual fact, control of budget,
yes,
it is a contribution that they make to the economy. I wanted you to allude to, or I was hoping you'd allude to.
Okay.
Because we are talking about inflation that is largely being driven by food prices. So if the farmers make their contribution in terms of being able to provide us with cheaper food, then they have made their contribution in the social contract that Arthur was talking about.
Okay.
I think you've answered it. So there is that contribution, and then there is the purchasing power that will be in their hands. I think the questions have run out now. I need to give...
You've done very well. You don't have to answer everything. Some of them were just general comments, like I'll make one at the tail end.
Yes, there is just one Chair, which on sustainability of economic engagements, and I think there was this question that about the counties, that in terms of what they are doing, is there sustainable development, and what is the role of my office? And I thought I should just contribute to this by saying that the counties have an elaborate planning framework. They start with the County Integrated Development Plan, from which the annual development plans are derived. So if they get it right and ensure there is proper public participation, AP as we call it, then the annual development plans will be derived from that. Then additionally, my office is ensuring now, and this we have made our duty, to ensure that the program-based budgeting, where we link the spending to particular outcomes, is done properly. Then I think we'll be home and dry.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Comment?
Yes, I'm conscious about the shortage of time and the pressure of time, so I'll answer only 4 questions, and I won't take more than 10 minutes. So I think Honorable Kimani Chuma asked me a very direct question, which is basically about widening the tax base. I think we need to make a conscious choice, which is that if you've decided that we can subsidize farmers as taxpayers, and then they have a bumper harvest, and decide for whatever reason politically that they should not pay tax, then you know what you've done is you've shrunk the tax base in terms of the number of people who are then eligible to pay income tax. So you then decide that you should be conscious that the decision you're making is that you're going to pay that money back to consumption prices, and that's fine. But at least what you then know is that this is what we've traded off. Subsidized farmers, especially large farmers, because large farmers are the ones who actually have surpluses to sell, and then government gives them a guaranteed return. So you subsidize them, you're giving them a guaranteed return. It means you're redistributing income from lower people to people, large farmers in Kenya. If that is the decision you're making, then it's fine. But you be conscious that you're redistributing income from smaller people to large industrial farmers. If that's the choice, that's okay. But let's be, admit it upfront. The second question that you asked me was about the housing development levy. The economics of housing is this. Modern houses are actually capital intensive. They're not labor intensive. What you're asking me is this. At the Institute of Economic Affairs, analysis of the memorandum that was issued together with this and some of the information that has been issued, that is not the best way to spend public money. So I'll give you an alternative. The alternative that we've done some very hard thinking about it at the Institute of Economic Affairs is, if you scrap the levy fund, well, you get to keep more money perhaps, but if you scrap the housing levy fund, this is what you could do for the same amount of money. Kenya has 40,000 schools. The number of children in schools in the next 11 years is going to double. Today, 15 million children wake up and go to public school. What that means is that there's a serious shortage in school infrastructure in Kenya, which the government of Kenya does well. Whatever we might talk about the quality of education, the government of Kenya historically has done a pretty decent job educating children, creating quite something. So already the Ministry of Education is struggling to actually keep school infrastructure to match the number of children going to schools. So if Parliament chooses to have a school infrastructure development plan,